The lone gunshot echoed across the prairie, startling Declan Armstrong awake as his horse nearly threw him from the saddle. He'd been riding for days, leaving behind the bloodshed of the Mason County War in Texas, a conflict he no longer believed in. The year was 1877, and Declan had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. "Easy, Scout," he murmured, patting the chestnut stallion's neck. His eyes scanned the horizon, trying to determine the source of the gunfire. The sun was setting over the Oklahoma Territory, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples. In the distance, he could make out a plume of black smoke rising from what appeared to be a small settlement. Declan hesitated. He'd promised himself to stay out of other people's troubles, yet something about that smoke column drew him forward. With a gentle nudge, he directed Scout toward the settlement, his hand instinctively resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. As he approached what turned out to be the modest town of Clearwater Springs, Oklahoma Territory, the damage became evident. A small schoolhouse at the edge of town stood partially burned, its roof collapsed on one side, windows shattered. The townspeople were gathered around it, some still carrying buckets, though the fire had clearly burned itself out. Declan dismounted, tying Scout to a nearby post. A thin man with spectacles noticed his approach and stepped forward. "You picked a bad time to visit Clearwater Springs, stranger," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Howard Simmons, the town physician." "Declan Armstrong," he replied, shaking the man's hand firmly. "What happened here?" Dr. Simmons sighed heavily. "Outlaws, the Reeves Gang. They've been terrorizing towns across the territory, demanded protection money from our businesses. When Mayor Phillips refused, they fired on the schoolhouse as a warning." Declan's jaw tightened. "Anyone hurt?" "Thankfully, no. Miss Thornton managed to get the children out the back door before the fire spread. She's still in there now, trying to salvage what she can of the books and supplies." As if on cue, a woman emerged from the damaged building, her arms full of soot-covered books. Her dress, once a vibrant blue, was now stained with ash, and her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins to frame a face that, despite the circumstances, held a determined expression. "Miss Beatrice Thornton," Dr. Simmons called out, "please, you've done enough for today." "The structure isn't sound." She looked up, noticing Declan for the first time. Their eyes met hers, a startling, clear blue against her soot-smudged face, and something inside Declan shifted, like a door opening to a room he hadn't known existed. "Just a few more books, Doctor," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "These children have precious little as it is." Without thinking, Declan stepped forward. "Madam, the doctor's right. That roof could come down any minute. Let me help you." She hesitated, studying him with those piercing blue eyes. "And you are?" Declan Armstrong, just passing through. A small, tired smile touched her lips. "Well, Mr. Armstrong, if you're truly offering help, there's a shelf of readers near the back window that needs saving." Declan nodded, handing the reins to a nearby boy. "Watch my horse, would you, son?" Then, ignoring the murmurs from the gathered townspeople, he ducked into the damaged schoolhouse. Inside, the acrid smell of smoke burned his nostrils. Charred desks were scattered about, and half the roof had indeed collapsed, leaving the evening sky visible. Beatrice Thornton was already back at work, carefully placing books into a crate. "The readers are there," she said without looking up, pointing to a partially burned bookshelf. "The ones that aren't damaged, please." Declan moved carefully across the unstable floor, gathering the books as instructed. As he worked, he found himself watching the schoolteacher. Despite the disaster around her, she moved with purpose and calm, occasionally whispering something to herself that sounded like counting. 27, 28, she murmured, placing another book in her crate. Counting the survivors? Declan asked. She glanced up, a flash of surprise crossing her face as if she'd forgotten he was there. Yes, I need to know what we've lost, and what we've saved. Declan nodded, understanding the accounting of damage all too well. How many children attend your school, Miss Thornton? 15 regularly, though sometimes more when the farming families aren't needing extra hands. She paused, looking around at the destruction. What am I going to do? Where will they learn now? The raw concern in her voice stirred something in Declan. He'd been drifting for months, trying to escape his past. Yet here was someone rooted firmly in place, fighting for her purpose despite the obstacles. Towns rebuild, Miss Thornton, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Declan felt as if those blue eyes could see straight through to all the darkness he carried. Do you believe that, Mr. Armstrong? Or is it just something people say? Before he could answer, a loud crack echoed through the building. Declan reacted instantly, dropping the books and lunging toward Beatrice as a section of the roof gave way. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her toward the door as debris crashed down where she had been standing just seconds before. They tumbled outside, Declan taking the brunt of the fall as they landed on the dirt street. For a moment they stayed there, his arms still protectively around her, both breathing heavily from the narrow escape. Miss Thornton, Mr. Armstrong, Doctor. Simmons hurried over, helping them to their feet. Are you hurt? Beatrice shook her head, her eyes wide as she looked back at the schoolhouse. The books aren't worth your life, Declan said firmly, still holding her elbow to steady her. She turned to him, and to his surprise her eyes filled with tears. They're all these children have. The desperation in her voice hit him harder than any physical blow. Before he could think better of it, Declan heard himself saying, then we'll get them more books. But first, that building needs to be made safe again. She questioned, arching an eyebrow. Declan hadn't planned to stay in Clearwater Springs. He hadn't planned to stay anywhere. Yet looking at the determination in Beatrice Thornton's ash-smudged face, he found himself unable to walk away. Yes, madam, He turned to address the gathered townspeople. I've got experience with construction. If you'll have me, I'd like to help rebuild your school. There was a moment of silence before an older man stepped forward. I'm Mayor Phillips. And frankly, Mr. Armstrong, we need all the help we can get. The Reeves Gang took most of our money, and the nearest marshal is in Oklahoma City, 2 days' ride from here. Declan nodded, not missing the skeptical glances exchanged among some of the townspeople. He was, after all, a stranger who'd ridden in on the heels of trouble. But Beatrice Thornton was looking at him with something new in her eyes, a cautious hope that made him stand a little straighter. Well then, she said, brushing dust from her ruined dress, I suppose we should find you somewhere to stay, Mr. Armstrong. Rebuilding a school sounds like more than a day's work. And just like that, Declan Armstrong, who had been running from attachment for years, found himself tethered to Clearwater Springs, Oklahoma territory, by nothing more than the grateful smile of a schoolteacher with ash in her hair and determination in her eyes. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Declan woke early in the small room above the general store that Mrs. Peterson, a kindly widow, had offered him at a reduced rate when she heard he was staying to help rebuild the school. He dressed quickly, strapping on his gun belt more from habit than necessity, and headed downstairs. The store wasn't open yet, but he could smell coffee brewing from the back room where the Peterson family lived. Mr. Armstrong, Mrs. Peterson called out. Come have some breakfast before you start. Can't work on an empty stomach. Declan hesitated, unused to such casual hospitality, but the plump, gray-haired woman was already ushering him to a table where her son, Tom, a boy of about 16, was already eating. "Madam, that's very kind, but no buts. Sit, eat." She placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "Tom here says he wants to help with the school, too." The boy looked up, nodding eagerly. "I'm good with tools, Mr. Armstrong. My pa taught me before he passed." Declan sat down, nodding his thanks to Mrs. Peterson. "I'd appreciate the help, Tom. We'll need to assess the damage first, see what can be salvaged." As he ate, Declan found himself strangely at ease. It had been a long time since he'd sat at a family table, longer still since he'd had a purpose beyond making it to the next town. After finishing his meal and thanking Mrs. Peterson, he and Tom headed toward the schoolhouse. They weren't the first to arrive. A group of men from town were already there, along with Beatrice Thornton. She looked different in the morning light, still determined, but with a weariness that the darkness had hidden. Her hair was neatly pinned now, and she wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days but was clean and well mended. "Good morning, Mr. Armstrong," she greeted him, her voice formal but warm. "I see you've recruited help already." "Tom volunteered," Declan replied, tipping his hat to her. "And it seems we're not the only ones with that idea." Indeed, several townsmen had brought tools and were already clearing debris from around the building. Mayor Phillips stood among them, deep in conversation with a tall man in overalls who Declan hadn't met the night before. Beatrice followed his gaze. "That's Jacob Miller, our local carpenter. He's brilliant with wood, but I'm afraid the materials for a full rebuild, well, they cost more than our town treasury has at the moment, especially after the Reeves Gang's visit." Declan studied the building more carefully in the daylight. The damage was extensive, but not beyond repair. The stone foundation was solid, and many of the walls were still standing. It was primarily the roof and one side that had borne the brunt of the fire. "We can work with this," he said finally. "Salvage what we can, rebuild what we can't." Beatrice looked skeptical. "And where will the children learn while we're rebuilding? Winter's coming, Mr. Armstrong. They can't sit in a half-constructed building with snow blowing in." He hadn't considered that. "How about the church or town hall?" She shook her head. "The church is too small and the town hall is used for too many other purposes. Besides, I need somewhere to store what books and materials we managed to save." Declan thought for a moment. "What about your home? Could you teach there temporarily?" A shadow passed over her face. "I board with the Wilsons. Their house is already crowded with their 5 children." "I see." Declan scratched his chin, feeling the stubble from not having shaved that morning. "Let me talk to Mayor Phillips and Mr. Miller. Maybe between us we can come up with a solution." Beatrice nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "I'll continue sorting through what we salvaged yesterday. Much of it is smoke damaged, but some might be usable." As she walked away, Declan was struck again by her resilience. Here was a woman who'd nearly been killed trying to save books for children who weren't her own. And now she was back at it, determined to continue their education despite the obstacles. He joined the men gathered around Mayor Phillips, introducing himself to Jacob Miller and several others he hadn't met the previous night. Miller was a serious man with calloused hands and a thoughtful expression that evaluated the schoolhouse with professional concern. "The damage is bad, but not impossible," Miller was saying. "The problem is lumber. After that railroad spur went through Westfield last year, they've been buying up all the good timber for miles around. What's available is expensive. And thanks to the Reeves Gang, the town coffers are nearly empty," Mayor Phillips added grimly. "We've telegraphed the territorial governor for assistance, but who knows when or if that will come." Declan listened carefully, piecing together the town's predicament. Clearwater Springs was like many small frontier settlements surviving, but always on the edge of disaster. One bad harvest, one outlaw raid, one fire could push them over that edge. What about the mill over in Red Rock? Declan asked, remembering passing through the neighboring town on his way to Clearwater Springs. They seemed to be doing good business. Miller shook his head. Owen Stevens runs that mill, and he and our mayor have had differences of opinion. He won't sell to us at a fair price, if at all. Mayor Phillips looked uncomfortable. It's a long story, Mr. Armstrong, and not relevant to our current situation. Declan didn't press, but filed the information away. What about fallen timber? There's a good stand of pine in that valley I rode through yesterday. Storm damage had taken down some sizable trees. Miller's expression brightened slightly. That's Turner land. Old man Turner might let us harvest the fallen trees for a reasonable price. He's got no use for them himself. It's worth asking, Mayor Phillips agreed. Mr. Armstrong, since you noticed the timber, perhaps you'd be willing to ride out there with Jacob this afternoon to speak with Turner. Declan nodded. Happy to. His gaze drifted back to where Beatrice was kneeling beside crates of books, carefully wiping soot from their covers. But first, we need to solve the immediate problem. Where will Miss Thornton teach until the school is rebuilt? The men exchanged glances, clearly having already discussed this issue without resolution. What about the old Watterson place? Tom Peterson suggested hesitantly, speaking up for the first time. When the adults turned to look at him, he continued more confidently. It's empty since the Wattersons moved to Kansas last spring. It's small, but it's got a big front room that could fit the children. Mayor Phillips frowned. That's at the edge of town, and it's been standing empty for months. Probably not in the best condition. But it has a solid roof, Miller pointed out, and walls, more than the school has right now. Declan made his decision. Tom and I will check out the Watterson place this morning. If it's suitable, we can clean it up while you all continue clearing the schoolhouse site. Then Miller and I will ride out to Turner's about the timber this afternoon. The men nodded in agreement, seemingly relieved that someone was taking charge of the situation. As they dispersed to their tasks, Declan approached Beatrice, who was still absorbed in her work with the books. Miss Thornton, he said, causing her to look up. Tom Peterson suggested the old Watterson house as a temporary schoolroom. We're going to check it out. Would you like to come with us? It would help to have your opinion on whether it would serve. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something like gratitude. Yes, I would like that very much. Thank you for considering my input, Mr. Armstrong. It's your school, he replied simply. And please call me Declan. Mr. Armstrong makes me feel like my father. A small smile touched her lips. Then you must call me Beatrice. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Let me just tell Mrs. Wilson where I'm going, and I'll meet you at the Watterson place in 15 minutes. True to her word, Beatrice arrived at the abandoned Watterson house precisely 15 minutes later. The small wooden structure stood at the eastern edge of town, its yard overgrown with weeds and its porch sagging slightly on one corner. But the roof appeared intact, and the windows, though dirty, were unbroken. Declan and Tom had already begun clearing the path to the front door. Tom's enthusiasm for the project was evident in the way he attacked the weeds with a borrowed scythe, while Declan examined the structural integrity of the porch. It's not as bad as it looks, Declan called out as Beatrice approached. The porch needs some new supports, but the house itself seems sound. Beatrice nodded, her expression guarded as she carefully climbed the steps to join him. The Wattersons were good people. Mr. Watterson built this house himself when they first came here 10 years ago. It's small, but it was always well maintained. Let's see the inside, Declan suggested, pulling a small ring of keys from his pocket. Mayor Phillips gave me these. Apparently the Wattersons left them with him in case anyone wanted to buy the place. The door creaked open to reveal a simple but spacious front room, dusty from months of disuse but otherwise intact. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows on 3 sides would provide ample light. Beatrice walked slowly around the space, her footsteps stirring up dust that danced in the sunbeams streaming through the windows. "It could work," she said finally, her voice soft but gaining conviction. "The children could sit on benches around the walls. We'd need a proper desk for writing practice, but for now, even boards across their laps would suffice." Tom, who had followed them inside, pointed to a door at the back of the room. "There are 2 small bedrooms back there and a kitchen. Maybe one bedroom could store your books and supplies." Beatrice's eyes brightened with the first genuine enthusiasm Declan had seen from her. "Yes, that's perfect, and the kitchen. We could use it for science lessons. The children have been learning about how plants grow. We could set up small experiments on the counters." Her excitement was infectious, and Declan found himself smiling as she began to plan out how she would arrange the space. It was a far cry from the despair of the previous night, and he felt a strange pride in having helped bring about that change. "It needs a good cleaning," he said, running a finger through the dust on a windowsill, "and that porch should be fixed before the children start tramping in and out. But I think you're right, it could work nicely as a temporary school." "I'll help clean," Tom volunteered eagerly. "And I bet some of the mothers would too once they know we found a place for school to continue." "Thank you, Tom," Beatrice said warmly. "Your enthusiasm does you credit." She turned to Declan, her expression serious but no longer hopeless. "And thank you, Mr. Declan. This morning I wasn't sure how I would continue teaching at all. Now we have a path forward." There was something in the way she said his name, something in the gratitude shining in her eyes, that made Declan's chest tighten strangely. He cleared his throat. "Just doing what needs doing, Beatrice. Now, let's make a list of what repairs are most urgent here. Then Tom and I need to get back to the schoolhouse site to help with the clearing before Miller, and I ride out to Turner's about that timber." As they worked together, listing repairs and planning the cleaning, Declan found himself watching Beatrice more often than was strictly necessary. There was a quiet strength about her that he admired, a devotion to her calling that resonated with something long buried inside him. When they finally left the Watterson house, Declan carrying a comprehensive list of needed repairs, he found himself wondering what had brought Beatrice Thornton to this small Oklahoma town. What made a woman so devoted to teaching that she would risk her life for books? There was a story there, he was certain, and despite his usual rule of avoiding entanglements, Declan found himself wanting to know it. The ride to the Turner property that afternoon was longer than Declan had remembered, probably because Jacob Miller proved to be a man of few words. They traveled mostly in silence, which suited Declan fine. It gave him time to think about the schoolhouse reconstruction, and if he was honest with himself, about Beatrice Thornton. Turner's farm was a modest spread nestled against the pine-covered hills Declan had ridden through on his way to Clearwater Springs. The fallen timber was visible from the road, several large pines brought down by a storm the previous winter, according to Miller. Old man Turner himself proved to be a surprisingly spry septuagenarian with a shock of white hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to evaluate Declan's worth with a single glance. "School burned, eh?" Turner said after they'd explained their visit. "Damn shame. Heard it was the Reeves Gang." Miller nodded. "They've been causing trouble all through the territory." Turner spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Bastards hit my neighbor Jenkins last month, took his horses and burned his barn. He squinted at Declan. "You're new, just passing through." "Staying to help rebuild," Declan replied, meeting the old man's gaze steadily. Turner seemed to approve of this answer. "Good. Town needs men willing to pitch in." He gestured toward the fallen timber. "Take what you need, no charge." Miller's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's mighty generous, Mr. Turner. We were prepared to pay a fair price." Turner waved a dismissive hand. "My grandchildren attend that school. Miss Thornton's teaching my youngest granddaughter to read." "Girl couldn't tell one letter from another when she started. Now she reads to me from the Bible every Sunday." His voice softened. "Use the timber for the school. Just send some strong backs to help haul it out. These old bones aren't what they used to be." Declan and Miller exchanged pleased glances. This was more than they'd hoped for. "We'll bring a team first thing tomorrow," Declan promised. "And we're grateful for your help, Mr. Turner." The old man nodded, then fixed Declan with those sharp gray eyes again. "You know anything about the Reeves Gang? Where they might hit next?" Declan shook his head. "Only what I've heard since arriving in town." Turner studied him a moment longer, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Well, word is they've been seen around Wilson Creek, about 30 miles north. Might be worth sending word to the marshal in Oklahoma City." "Mayor Phillips already telegraphed the territorial governor," Miller said, "but we'll pass along the information about Wilson Creek." As they rode back to Clearwater Springs, Miller was more talkative than he'd been on the outward journey, clearly pleased with the outcome of their visit. "Turner's a crusty old coot, but he's always had a soft spot for the school," he explained. "His daughter died in childbirth years ago, and he's raised her 3 children since. Education means a lot to him." Declan nodded, thinking about the interconnections in this small community, how one person's generosity could make such a difference. It was different from the anonymity of larger towns, or the harsh politics of the cattle wars he'd left behind in Texas. What about those differences of opinion between Mayor Phillips and the mill owner in Red Rock? Declan asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Miller hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not really my place to say, but, well, it involves Miss Thornton, actually." Declan's interest sharpened. "How so?" "Stevens, the mill owner, he courted her when she first came to the territory 2 years ago. Was quite persistent about it, too. But she wasn't interested. Made that clear, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. Mayor Phillips eventually had to step in, told Stevens to leave her be or he'd contact the territorial authorities about harassment." "I see," Declan said, processing this new information. "And Stevens took offense." Miller nodded. "Made it his mission to make things difficult for Clearwater Springs ever since. Raised timber prices, refused to extend credit. It's part of why our town's been struggling." Declan frowned. Men who couldn't accept a woman's rejection were a particular type of trouble he'd encountered before. "Miss Thornton seems quite capable of handling herself." "Oh, she is," Miller agreed quickly. "Don't mistake me. She's as strong-minded a woman as you'll ever meet. But Stevens, he's got a mean streak, and money gives a man power out here." They rode in silence for a while, Declan turning over this new information. He told himself his interest was purely practical, knowing the town's situation would help him better assist with the rebuilding. But a small voice in the back of his mind suggested his concern might be more personal where Beatrice Thornton was concerned. By the time they returned to Clearwater Springs, the sun was setting. To Declan's surprise, there was significant progress at the schoolhouse site. The debris had been cleared away, the unstable sections of walls had been taken down, and what could be salvaged had been carefully stacked and sorted. Even more surprising was the sight of Beatrice Thornton, sleeves rolled up, working alongside several women to clean and repair salvaged desks. Her hair had come partially loose again, and a smudge of dirt marked her cheek, but she was smiling as she worked, a real smile that transformed her face and caught Declan off guard with its beauty. She looked up as they approached, the smile still lingering on her lips. "Good news, I hope." Declan nodded, suddenly aware that he was dusty and sweaty from the long ride. "Very good news. Turner's giving us the timber at no cost. We'll go back tomorrow with wagons to haul it out." "That's wonderful," Beatrice exclaimed. "And we've made progress here too, Mrs. Wilson organized a cleaning party for the Watterson house. It's nearly ready for use. We can start classes again the day after tomorrow." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Declan found himself grinning back at her. "You work fast, Miss Thornton." "Beatrice," she corrected him, her eyes twinkling. "And yes, when it comes to education, I don't believe in wasting time. These children have already missed several days of learning." Mayor Phillips approached, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Armstrong, Miller, good to see you back. Successful journey, I take it." As Miller explained their arrangement with Turner, Declan found his attention drifting back to Beatrice, who had returned to her work on the desks. There was something captivating about her dedication, about the way she approached even the most mundane task with purpose and care. "Armstrong." The mayor's voice broke into his thoughts. "Did you hear me?" Declan turned back, slightly embarrassed to have been caught staring. "Sorry, Mayor. What was that?" "I said we're planning to start hauling the timber tomorrow. Can you lead a team back to Turner's place? You know the location, and Miller needs to stay here to oversee the foundation repairs." "Of course," Declan agreed readily. First light," Phillips confirmed. "And Armstrong, thank you. Not many strangers would step up like this." Declan shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just doing what needs doing." As the meeting broke up and people began heading home for the evening, Declan found himself walking beside Beatrice as she made her way toward the Wilson home. "You've accomplished a lot today," he commented. "The temporary school, organizing the salvaged materials. You're quite efficient." She glanced at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Armstrong?" "Declan," he reminded her. "And yes, it is. I've known military commanders who couldn't organize their men half as well as you've organized this town." Beatrice laughed softly, the sound warming something inside him. "I wouldn't go that far. These people care about their children's education. They're motivated to help." "Because you've shown them the value of it," Declan pointed out. "That takes more than just being a good teacher. It takes leadership." She looked genuinely surprised by the observation. "I've never thought of it that way. I just do what I believe in." They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Declan asked, "What brought you to Clearwater Springs, if you don't mind my asking?" Beatrice's expression grew more guarded, though not unfriendly. "The opportunity to build something. I taught in a large school in St. Louis before this, but I was just one of many teachers, following someone else's curriculum, someone else's rules." She gestured around them. "Here I can make a real difference. These children, some of them, would never learn to read or write or understand mathematics without this school." "It's a calling for you," Declan observed. She nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, exactly. A calling." She looked at him curiously. "And what about you, Declan Armstrong? What brings a man with military experience to our little corner of the Oklahoma Territory?" It was Declan's turn to grow guarded. "Just passing through, as I said." Beatrice studied him with those perceptive blue eyes, clearly not believing the simplistic answer but polite enough not to press. "Well, I'm glad you were passing through at exactly the right moment. Those books might not mean much to most people, but they're treasures to us." They had reached the Wilson home, a modest two-story house with a well-tended garden. Lanterns glowed in the windows, and the sounds of children's voices could be heard from inside. "This is me," Beatrice said, pausing at the gate. "Thank you for walking with me, and for everything you're doing for the school." "My pleasure," Declan replied, surprised to realize he meant it sincerely. "I'll see you tomorrow after we get back with the timber," she nodded, smiling. "I'll be at the Watterson house, setting up the temporary classroom. Stop by if you'd like to see our progress." "I'll do that." Declan tipped his hat to her and waited until she was safely inside before turning toward the general store where his room awaited. As he walked through the darkening streets, Declan reflected on the unexpected turn his journey had taken. A week ago, he'd been riding aimlessly, trying to outrun memories of the bloodshed in Mason County. Now, he was helping rebuild a school and finding himself increasingly drawn to a schoolteacher with determined blue eyes and a strength of character that both impressed and intrigued him. He wasn't looking to put down roots, hadn't allowed himself to consider such a thing since leaving his family's ranch years ago. Yet something about Clearwater Springs, and Beatrice Thornton in particular, was beginning to feel dangerously like belonging. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the eastern hills when Declan and a team of 6 men set out for the Turner property. They drove 3 wagons, sturdy but weathered vehicles that had seen years of farm work. The mood was optimistic. Free timber was a windfall none of them had expected. Tom Peterson had begged to come along, but his mother had insisted he stay to help with the temporary schoolhouse. "Miss Thornton needs those benches built today if school's to start tomorrow," she told him firmly. The boy had acquiesced, though his disappointment was evident. The journey to Turner's farm took most of the morning. The old man greeted them with a thermos of hot coffee and specific instructions about which fallen trees would be most suitable for their purposes. "Those 3 big pines by the creek have the straightest grain," he advised, pointing. "And there's a good oak came down in the last spring storm harder to work with, but it'll make solid support beams." The men set to work with axes and saws, cutting the fallen trees into manageable sections that could be loaded onto the wagons. It was hard, sweaty labor, but the men worked with purpose, fueled by the knowledge that they were rebuilding something vital to their community. Declan worked alongside them, his shirt soon soaked with sweat despite the cool autumn air. He was no stranger to physical labor, having grown up on a ranch where every day brought new challenges. There was something satisfying about the rhythmic swing of the axe, the clean split of wood, the tangible progress they were making. By mid-afternoon, they had loaded all 3 wagons with as much timber as the horses could pull. Turner had even provided a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, refusing payment when it was offered. "Just make sure my grandkids have a proper school again before winter sets in," he said gruffly. "That's payment enough." As they prepared to leave, Turner pulled Declan aside. "Got word this morning about the Reeves Gang," he said in a low voice. "They hit a farm up near Wilson Creek last night." "Shot the farmer when he tried to protect his horses." Declan frowned. "Dead," Turner nodded grimly. "Word is they're moving south again, might be heading back this way." "I'll let Mayor Phillips know," Declan promised, a familiar tension coiling in his gut. He'd hoped to leave violence behind him, but it seemed determined to follow. The journey back to Clearwater Springs was slower, the heavily laden wagons requiring careful handling on the uneven roads. It was nearly dusk by the time they reached town, the men tired but satisfied with their day's work. They unloaded the timber near the schoolhouse site, where Miller inspected it with obvious approval. "Good quality," he declared. "We can start cutting it to size tomorrow." Mayor Phillips was equally pleased. "This puts us weeks ahead of where I thought we'd be," he told Declan. With this timber and the materials we salvaged, we might have the school rebuilt before the first snow. After sharing Turner's warning about the Reeves Gang, Declan excused himself. He was dusty and exhausted, but before heading back to his room for a well-deserved rest, he found himself walking toward the Watterson house, drawn by a promise made the previous evening. The small house was transformed from the dusty, abandoned structure of yesterday. The yard had been cleared of weeds, the porch repaired, and warm light glowed from freshly cleaned windows. As Declan approached, he could hear voices inside Beatrice's calm, instructive tone and the higher pitches of children responding. He hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly aware of his disheveled state after a day of hard labor. But before he could decide whether to come back later, the door opened, and a stream of children emerged, chattering excitedly. School might not officially start until tomorrow, but it appeared Beatrice had already gathered her pupils for some preparation. The children paused when they saw him, curiosity in their young faces. A small girl with red pigtails stepped forward boldly. "Are you the cowboy who's fixing our school?" she asked, looking up at him with frank interest. Declan couldn't help but smile. "I'm helping to fix it, yes. Miss Thornton says you saved the books," the girl continued. "I like books, especially the one about the little girl who lives in the big woods." "Sarah, don't pester Mr. Armstrong," Beatrice's voice called from inside before she appeared in the doorway. She looked tired but satisfied, her hair neatly pinned back, her sleeves rolled up to reveal slender forearms. "She's not pestering me," Declan assured her. "Just asking about the school." Beatrice smiled at the little girl. "Sarah, please catch up with your brothers. Tell your mother I'll see you all here at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning." The girl nodded and ran off to join the other departing children, leaving Declan and Beatrice alone. She regarded him with warm eyes that took in his dusty, sweat-stained appearance without judgment. "Successful timber expedition, I take it?" she asked. Declan nodded. 3 wagon loads. Good pine and some oak. Miller thinks it's enough to get the roof and walls rebuilt before the first snow." "That's wonderful news." She gestured to the house behind her. "Would you like to see what we've accomplished here? It's not fancy, but it will serve." Declan followed her inside, removing his hat as he entered. The transformation was remarkable. The large front room had been thoroughly cleaned, its wooden floor swept and mopped to a soft gleam. Simple benches lined the walls, and a sturdy table at the front of the room served as Beatrice's desk. Slate boards hung on one wall, and bookshelves clearly newly built held the salvaged readers and textbooks. "Tom Peterson and his friends built the shelves," Beatrice explained, noticing his gaze. "And Mrs. Wilson organized a group of mothers to sew new curtains." She ran a hand along one of the benches. "It's makeshift, but it will do until the proper school is rebuilt." "It's impressive," Declan said sincerely. "You've created a real classroom here in just 2 days." Beatrice's expression softened with pride. "The whole town helped. Everyone contributed something: time, materials, labor." She looked around the room. "It reminds me why I came here in the first place, this sense of community, of building something together." Declan understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. It was what he'd missed during his years of drifting, what he'd failed to find in the cattle wars of Texas, where men fought for profit rather than principle. "The children seem excited about starting classes again," he observed. Beatrice smiled. "They are. I had them come by today to see the new space and help arrange their books. I wanted them to feel ownership of it, to know that not even fire can stop their education." There was such conviction in her voice, such dedication to her purpose, that Declan found himself admiring her more with each passing moment. She wasn't just teaching children their letters. She was teaching them resilience, showing them how to rebuild after disaster. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "Not just the teaching, but the rebuilding, the hope." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. That means a great deal coming from someone who—" "Who what?" Declan prompted when she trailed off. Beatrice looked at him directly, her blue eyes searching his face. "Someone who seems to understand the importance of rebuilding, though I suspect your experience with it comes from a different sort of destruction." Her perception unsettled him. "What makes you say that?" she gestured vaguely. "The way you carry yourself, the gun you wear, the look in your eyes sometimes like you're seeing things the rest of us don't." She paused. "You don't have to tell me. We all have pasts we'd rather not discuss." Declan was saved from responding by a knock at the open door. They both turned to see Mayor Phillips standing there, looking apologetic for the interruption. "Sorry to disturb you both, but I wanted to check on the temporary school's progress," the mayor said, stepping inside. "Very impressive, Miss Thornton." "Thank you, Mayor," Beatrice replied, her professional demeanor returning. "We'll be ready for classes tomorrow morning." Phillips nodded approvingly, then turned to Declan. "Armstrong, I've called a town meeting tonight at the saloon. 8 o'clock. Given what you heard from Turner about the Reeves Gang possibly heading back this way, we need to discuss security measures." Declan nodded, a familiar tension returning to his shoulders. "I'll be there." After the mayor left, a moment of awkward silence fell between Declan and Beatrice. The easy connection they'd been sharing had been interrupted, and Declan's instinct was to retreat, to re-establish the distance that had kept him safe for so long. "I should go," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "Get cleaned up before the meeting." Beatrice nodded, though something like disappointment flickered in her eyes. "Of course. Thank you for stopping by, Declan, and thank you again for everything you're doing." As he walked back toward town, Declan found himself unsettled by how easily Beatrice Thornton seemed to see past his carefully constructed facade. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him and seen more than just a drifter with a gun. The fact that she did, and that he found himself wanting to let her see more, was both alluring and dangerous. The town meeting that night was held in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon, the only establishment in Clearwater Springs large enough to accommodate most of the adult male population. Women weren't expressly forbidden from attending such gatherings, but custom kept most at home. Declan was therefore surprised to see Beatrice slip in just as Mayor Phillips was calling the meeting to order, taking a seat near the back of the room. Several men cast disapproving glances her way, but no one openly objected to her presence. Phillips, after a moment's hesitation, simply continued with the business at hand. "As most of you know, the Reeves Gang has been sighted near Wilson Creek," the mayor announced. "There's reason to believe they may be heading back in this direction." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled townspeople. The Reeves Gang's previous visit was still fresh in everyone's minds, the partially rebuilt schoolhouse, a daily reminder of the violence they were capable of. "What are we going to do about it?" called out a heavy-set man Declan recognized as the blacksmith. "Last time they came, we weren't prepared. They took our money and burned our school. Next time could be worse." "That's why we're here, Mr. Daniels," Phillips replied patiently. "To discuss our options." Various suggestions were called out, everything from forming a civilian patrol to sending for federal marshals from Oklahoma City. The mood grew increasingly agitated, with different factions arguing for different approaches. Declan remained silent, observing the dynamics of the town's leadership. It was clear that while Phillips was respected, there were divisions among the townspeople about how to handle the threat. Finally, Jacob Miller stood up. "We need to face facts. We're not gunfighters. Most of us have never fired a shot in anger. If the Reeves Gang returns in force, we can't stop them through direct confrontation. This sobering assessment was met with grudging nods of agreement from many in the room. So we just let them rob us again, the blacksmith demanded. Burn more buildings? No, Miller replied firmly, but we need to be smart about this. Set up an early warning system, have a plan for getting the women and children to safety if they come, and maybe— He hesitated, then looked directly at Declan. Maybe ask the advice of someone who has experience with this sort of situation. All eyes turned to Declan, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He hadn't come to this meeting intending to take a leadership role. In fact, his instinct was to remain as uninvolved as possible in the town's larger problems. He was here to help rebuild a school, not fight another man's war. But then his gaze met Beatrice's across the room. There was no expectation in her eyes, no demand, just a quiet confidence that reminded him of who he had once been before Mason County, before he'd started running. Declan stood slowly. Miller's right. Direct confrontation would be a mistake. The Reeves Gang reportedly has at least 8 men, all experienced gunmen. But there are things you can do to protect yourselves and your property. For the next half hour, Declan outlined practical measures the town could take, establishing lookout points on the approaches to town, creating caches of valuables that wouldn't be easily found in a quick raid, designating safe locations where women and children could shelter if necessary. The most important thing is information, he concluded. Know when they're coming before they arrive. That gives you options, time to implement whatever plan you decide on. The meeting ended with the formation of committees to handle different aspects of the town's defense. To Declan's relief, no one suggested that he should take charge of these efforts, though several men approached him afterward to ask specific questions about his recommendations. As the crowd dispersed, Declan found himself lingering, watching as Beatrice engaged in earnest conversation with Mayor Phillips near the door. Whatever they were discussing, Phillips seemed reluctant but eventually nodded in agreement before bidding her good night. Declan was about to leave himself when Beatrice approached him, her expression determined. "Walk me home," she asked, though it didn't sound like a request that required an answer. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. They walked in silence for a few moments before Beatrice spoke. "You have military experience," she said. It wasn't a question. Declan nodded, seeing no point in denial. "Union Army, but that was a long time ago." And since then, he hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "I've been moving around. Different jobs, different places." Beatrice stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "Declan, I'm not asking out of idle curiosity. This town, these people, they're important to me. If the Reeves Gang returns, children could be in danger. My students." Her voice was steady but intense. "I need to know if you can help us, really help us, not just with lookouts and safe houses." The directness of her question caught him off guard. "You're asking if I can fight. I'm asking if you will." The distinction wasn't lost on Declan. Could he fight? Certainly. He'd been doing it most of his adult life, first in the war, then in a series of conflicts that seemed to follow him wherever he went. But would he fight for Clearwater Springs? Put himself at risk for a town he'd stumbled into by chance? A week ago, the answer would have been a simple no. He was tired of fighting other people's battles, tired of the violence that seemed to define his existence. But now, looking into Beatrice's determined eyes, he found his resolve wavering. "I came here to help rebuild your school," he said carefully, "not to fight your outlaws." "And I appreciate that more than I can say," she replied. "But the school won't matter much if the town isn't safe." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes. The mayor's deputizing volunteers tomorrow. He didn't want to ask you directly, said you've already done enough by helping with the school and offering advice tonight. But you're asking. Yes. She didn't look away, didn't soften the request with platitudes or emotional appeals. I'm asking because I think you can make a difference, and because I think, despite your reluctance, you care what happens here. Declan was silent, weighing her words against his own desire to leave violence behind. She was right about one thing: he did care, more than he'd intended to. About the school, about the town, and especially about the brave, forthright woman standing before him. I'll think about it, he said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't the firm no he would have given a week earlier. Beatrice nodded, accepting his answer without pressing further. They resumed walking, the silence between them now companionable rather than strained. When they reached the Wilson home, Beatrice paused at the gate. School starts at 8 tomorrow. You're welcome to visit anytime, see what all your hard work has helped create. I might do that, Declan replied, surprised to find himself meaning it. Good night, Beatrice. Good night, Declan. She hesitated, then added softly, whatever you decide about the deputy position, thank you for being here when we needed you. As Declan walked back to his room above the general store, her words echoed in his mind. Being needed was a double-edged sword. It created obligations, connections, the very ties he'd been avoiding for years. Yet there was something undeniably compelling about it, about the possibility of belonging somewhere, to someone, again. The first day of school in the temporary Watterson house began with surprising smoothness. The 15 regular students arrived promptly at 8, along with 3 others whose attendance had previously been sporadic. The children adapted quickly to the new space, excited by the adventure of it all, despite the circumstances that had necessitated the change. Beatrice maintained her usual structured approach to the day's lessons, starting with reading for the younger children while the older ones worked on mathematics problems. The mixed-age classroom required careful planning, but she had refined her methods over the past 2 years, creating a system that allowed each child to progress at their own pace while still benefiting from group instruction. By mid-morning, the children were fully engaged in their studies, the trauma of the school fire seemingly forgotten in the normalcy of lessons and learning. Beatrice moved among them, offering guidance where needed, praise where deserved, watching with satisfaction as knowledge took root and grew. A soft knock at the door interrupted a geography lesson just before noon. Beatrice looked up to see Declan standing in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression somewhere between awkward and curious. Mr. Armstrong, she greeted him, conscious of the children's sudden interest in their visitor. Please come in. Declan stepped inside, nodding politely to the class. Sorry to interrupt, Miss Thornton. I just wanted to see how the first day was progressing. Very well, thank you. She turned to her students. Children, this is Mr. Armstrong. He's helping rebuild our school and provided the idea for our temporary classroom here. Are you really a cowboy? Asked Jimmy Wilson, an 8-year-old with a perpetual cowlick and endless questions. Before Declan could answer, Beatrice interjected smoothly. Mr. Armstrong is many things, Jimmy, including a builder and a veteran. And right now, he's our guest. She glanced at the clock on the wall. In fact, his arrival is perfectly timed. It's nearly noon, so let's break for lunch. You may eat outside if you wish, but stay within sight of the house. The children needed no further encouragement, gathering their lunch pails and filing out with excited chatter, many casting curious glances at Declan as they passed. Within moments, Beatrice and Declan were alone in the classroom, the sounds of children's play filtering in through the open windows. I hope I didn't disrupt your lesson, Declan said, still standing somewhat awkwardly by the door. Beatrice smiled, gesturing for him to come further into the room. Not at all. They needed a break, and I confess I was curious whether you would take me up on my invitation to visit. Declan moved to examine the classroom setup, seeming more comfortable with something to focus on besides her. You've created a real school here, he observed, running a hand along one of the benches. The children seem to be adapting well. Children are resilient, Beatrice replied, watching him. More so than adults sometimes. They accept change and move forward while we. She trailed off, not wanting to push the conversation into territory he might not be ready to explore. Declan glanced at her, then back at the books arranged neatly on the shelves. I spoke with Mayor Phillips this morning, he said after a moment. Told him I'd accept the deputy position. Temporarily. Beatrice felt a surge of relief mixed with concern. Thank you, I know that wasn't an easy decision. No, it wasn't. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I left Texas to get away from fighting, Beatrice. I've seen what violence does to communities, to the people caught in the middle. Yet you're willing to risk becoming part of it again. Why? She asked the question gently, genuinely wanting to understand this complex man who had ridden into their lives so unexpectedly. Declan seemed to consider his words carefully. Because sometimes standing aside causes more harm than stepping in, and because he hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. Because what you're building here, this school, these children's futures, it matters. It deserves protection. The conviction in his voice moved her deeply. Beatrice had encountered many men since coming west, some kind, some crude, some merely indifferent, but few who understood so intuitively the importance of her work. The children would love to hear about your travels sometime, she said, changing the subject to safer ground. Geography comes alive when they can connect it to real people who have seen distant places. Declan looked startled, then amused. I'm not much of a storyteller, Beatrice. I disagree, she countered with a small smile. The way you outlined those security measures last night had everyone captivated. You have a natural way of explaining complex ideas simply. Before he could respond, the classroom door burst open and Sarah, the little girl with red pigtails, rushed in. Miss Thornton, come quick. Jimmy fell out of the tree. Beatrice was instantly alert. Is he hurt? Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. His arm looks funny and he's crying. Beatrice hurried outside, Declan close behind her. They found Jimmy Wilson sitting at the base of the large oak tree in the yard, cradling his right arm and trying valiantly not to cry in front of his schoolmates who had gathered around him in a concerned circle. Kneeling beside the boy, Beatrice gently examined his arm, which was already swelling and clearly bent at an unnatural angle. It's broken, she confirmed softly. We need to get you to Dr. Simmons. Jimmy's face crumpled at this news, a fresh wave of tears spilling down his cheeks. I'm sorry, Miss Thornton. I know we're not supposed to climb the tree. That's a conversation for later, Beatrice replied, keeping her voice calm despite her worry. Right now, we need to take care of your arm. I'll carry him, Declan said, already moving to lift the boy as gently as possible. Jimmy winced, but didn't cry out as Declan gathered him carefully in his arms, mindful of the injured limb. Beatrice quickly organized the remaining children, appointing the oldest girl, 12-year-old Mary Peterson, to be in charge until she returned. Continue with your lunch, then read Chapter 4 in your history books. I'll be back as soon as I can. As they walked swiftly toward Dr. Simmons' office at the other end of town, Jimmy nestled against Declan's chest, occasionally sniffling but trying hard to be brave. Beatrice walked beside them, offering reassurances to the boy while casting grateful glances at Declan. Have you ever broken a bone, Mr. Armstrong? Jimmy asked, his voice small but curious. A few, Declan replied, adjusting his hold to keep the boy's arm as stable as possible. "My left arm, 2 ribs, and my right ankle over the years. Did they hurt real bad?" "They did," Declan admitted, "but they healed. Yours will too. Will I still be able to be a cowboy when I grow up?" The question revealed the boy's deepest fear, and Beatrice felt her heart twist with sympathy. "Absolutely," Declan assured him without hesitation. "I knew a cowhand in Texas who broke both arms falling off a horse during a stampede. He was back in the saddle 3 months later." This information seemed to comfort Jimmy enormously, and he relaxed against Declan's chest. "That's good, 'cause I'm gonna have a ranch someday, bigger than Mr. Turner's." Dr. Simmons' office was fortunately not far. The physician, alerted by their approach, already had his examination table prepared when they arrived. With efficient gentleness, he examined Jimmy's arm, confirming Beatrice's diagnosis of a break. "A clean fracture," he announced after a careful examination. "It will need to be set and splinted, but it should heal nicely." He looked at Jimmy with kind but serious eyes. "This will hurt for a moment, son, but then it will feel better. Can you be brave for me?" Jimmy glanced at Declan, who gave him an encouraging nod, then back at the doctor. "Yes, sir." "Good lad. Miss Thornton, perhaps you could wait outside. Mr. Armstrong, I may need your assistance holding him still." Beatrice hesitated, reluctant to leave Jimmy but understanding the doctor's reasoning. "I'll be right outside, Jimmy," she promised, squeezing his good hand before stepping into the waiting room. The minutes that followed were difficult, marked by Jimmy's muffled cries as Dr. Simmons set the bone. Beatrice paced the small waiting area, each sound from the examination room piercing her heart. As a teacher, she felt responsible for her students' well-being, and accidents like this, though inevitable with active children, always left her questioning whether she could have prevented them. Finally, the door opened and Declan emerged, his expression somber but reassuring. "He did well. Dr. Simmons is finishing with the splint now." "Thank you for staying with him," Beatrice said sincerely. "Your presence seemed to comfort him." Declan shrugged slightly. "Boys that age need to feel brave, especially when they're scared." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience, and Beatrice wondered again about Declan's past, about the events that had shaped him into the man who stood before her now. Before she could respond, Dr. Simmons appeared with Jimmy, the boy's arm now securely splinted and held in a sling. His face was tear-streaked but composed, a certain pride evident in his bearing. "Jimmy needs to rest for the remainder of the day," Dr. Simmons instructed. "I've sent word to his parents. His father should be here shortly to take him home. I'll stay with him until Mr. Wilson arrives," Beatrice offered immediately. "Actually," Dr. Simmons said with a slight smile, "Mr. Armstrong has already volunteered for that duty. And I believe you have a classroom of children waiting for their teacher's return." Beatrice looked at Declan in surprise. He met her gaze steadily, a hint of challenge in his eyes as if daring her to question his capability to comfort an injured child. "That's very kind of you, Declan," she said finally. "Jimmy, you mind Mr. Armstrong and Dr. Simmons, and I'll come by your house after school to see how you're feeling." Jimmy nodded, a hint of excitement replacing the pain in his expression at the prospect of spending time with the intriguing newcomer. "Yes, Miss Thornton." As Beatrice walked back to the temporary schoolhouse, she found herself replaying the events of the morning in her mind. Declan Armstrong continued to surprise her, the hardened drifter with a gunfighter's reflexes, who could so gently carry an injured child. The man reluctant to engage with the town's problems, who had nevertheless agreed to stand against the Reeves Gang. There were layers to him that she was only beginning to glimpse, depths beneath the reserved exterior he presented to the world. And despite her usual caution, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to discover what lay beneath the surface. Back at the Watterson house, the children bombarded her with questions about Jimmy's condition, their genuine concern touching. Beatrice assured them that their classmate would recover fully, then guided them back to their lessons, though their concentration was understandably affected by the morning's excitement. It was late afternoon by the time school ended, and Beatrice had tidied the classroom in preparation for the next day. True to her word, she stopped by the Wilson home on her way to her own lodgings, finding Jimmy resting comfortably under his mother's watchful eye. Mr. Armstrong stayed with him until his father arrived, Mrs. Wilson told her. Such a kind man, telling Jimmy stories about his cowboy days to keep his mind off the pain. Jimmy's quite taken with him. Mr. Armstrong has been a great help to our community, Beatrice replied diplomatically, though she felt a private satisfaction at this further evidence of Declan's compassionate nature. After assuring herself that Jimmy was as comfortable as could be expected and promising to bring his schoolwork the following day, Beatrice continued on her way. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and red, when she encountered Declan walking toward the town center, now wearing a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. "It's official, then," she observed, nodding toward the badge. Declan glanced down at it with a mixture of resignation and resolve. "For now, Mayor Phillips swore me in this afternoon. How does it feel?" "Like a weight I thought I'd put down," he admitted, "but maybe one worth carrying again for the right reasons." They walked together in companionable silence for a moment before Beatrice spoke again. "Mrs. Wilson tells me you entertained Jimmy with cowboy stories until his father arrived. That was kind of you." A hint of embarrassment crossed Declan's features. The boy needed distraction. "And contrary to what I said this morning, I do know a few stories. I'm sure they were fascinating. Jimmy's always been enamored with cowboys and the idea of ranching. He's a good kid, brave." Declan's expression softened slightly. "Reminds me a bit of my younger brother at that age. Always climbing things he shouldn't, asking questions nobody could answer." It was the first personal detail Declan had shared about his family, and Beatrice treasured it like a rare gift, careful not to press for more lest he retreat behind his usual reserve. "Will you join us for supper at the Wilsons' tonight?" she asked instead. "Mrs. Wilson specifically mentioned inviting you as thanks for helping Jimmy." Declan hesitated, clearly torn between the impulse to decline and the pull of human connection. "I should patrol the town perimeter first. Phillips wants to establish a regular schedule." "The invitation stands for whenever you finish," Beatrice assured him. "Mrs. Wilson always makes enough to feed an army." After a moment's further consideration, Declan nodded. "Thank you. I'll come by after my patrol." As they parted ways, Beatrice found herself looking forward to the evening with an anticipation that went beyond simple neighborly fellowship. Declan Armstrong was becoming increasingly important to her, his presence a steady anchor in the chaotic aftermath of the school fire. And though she reminded herself that he had only committed to staying temporarily, she couldn't help hoping that Clearwater Springs, and perhaps she herself, might give him reason to put down roots at last. The next several days fell into a pattern. Beatrice taught at the temporary schoolhouse each day, watching with satisfaction as her students adapted to their new surroundings and continued to progress in their studies. Declan split his time between his deputy duties and helping with the school reconstruction, which was advancing rapidly thanks to the quality timber from Turner's property and the dedicated work of the town's men. In the evenings, they often found themselves in each other's company, sometimes at community gatherings, sometimes in more private conversations as Declan walked Beatrice home after school. They spoke of books she loved, places he had seen, the children's progress, the school's rebuilding. Gradually, Declan began to share more of himself, small details about his childhood in Missouri, his service during the war, his years working cattle in Texas. He never directly addressed what had driven him to leave Texas, and Beatrice didn't ask, sensing that some wounds were still too raw to probe. But she came to understand that whatever had happened there had left him deeply disillusioned with violence and conflict, making his decision to accept the deputy position all the more significant. For his part, Declan found himself increasingly drawn to Beatrice's quiet strength and unwavering dedication. Unlike many women he had known, she didn't seem intimidated by his past or his capabilities with a gun. Instead, she engaged with him as an equal, challenging his thinking, making him laugh with her unexpected wit, impressing him with her intuitive understanding of her students' needs. A week after Jimmy's accident, Declan arrived at the temporary schoolhouse just as classes were ending for the day. The children had grown accustomed to his visits and greeted him cheerfully as they filed out, many stopping to show him their work or ask questions about his deputy's badge. Inside, he found Beatrice organizing a set of maps she had been using to teach geography. "The schoolhouse reconstruction is making good progress," he informed her, leaning against one of the desks. "Miller thinks the roof will be on by the end of next week, weather permitting." Beatrice looked up with a pleased smile. "That's wonderful news. The children ask about it every day. They miss their proper schoolroom, though they've adapted admirably to this space." Speaking of adapting, Declan continued, Mayor Phillips received a telegram from the territorial governor today. There's a U.S. Marshal being sent to deal with the Reeves Gang. Should arrive within the week. "That is good news," Beatrice said, though her expression grew troubled. "Does that mean, will you be leaving once the marshal arrives?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Declan had made no secret of his temporary commitment to the deputy position, yet over the past week, the idea of moving on had become increasingly difficult to contemplate. "I haven't decided," he admitted. "The school won't be finished for at least another 3 weeks, according to Miller's estimate." Hope flickered in Beatrice's eyes, quickly tempered by her natural reserve. "We would certainly welcome your continued assistance with the rebuilding." "Just the rebuilding?" Declan found himself asking, the words escaping before he could consider their wisdom. Beatrice met his gaze steadily, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "No, not just the rebuilding. Your presence has become valuable to the community, to me." The confession, modest as it was, represented a significant step for both of them. Declan had spent years avoiding attachments, and Beatrice, as he had come to understand, guarded her independence fiercely after escaping the restrictive expectations of her family in St. Louis. Before Declan could respond, the door to the schoolhouse burst open and Tom Peterson rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Deputy Armstrong, Miss Thornton. There's riders coming, strangers, 6 of them, armed." Declan was instantly alert. "Where?" "Northern Road." "Mr. Turner's grandson spotted them and rode to warn us. They're about 20 minutes out." Declan turned to Beatrice, all personal matters set aside in the face of potential danger. "Get the children inside their homes. Follow the safety plan we discussed." She nodded, already moving toward the door. "Be careful, Declan." He gave her a brief nod, then hurried out with Tom, heading toward the center of town where Mayor Phillips would be organizing the town's defense according to the plan they had developed. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The women and children were gathered in the stone-walled church, the most defensible building in town. Men with rifles took up positions at strategic points, though many had little experience with firearms beyond hunting. Declan, Phillips, and the blacksmith, who had some military experience, coordinated their placement, emphasizing that they should remain hidden unless directly threatened. As the riders approached, Declan positioned himself at the edge of town, partially concealed but visible enough that the newcomers would see him before they reached the first buildings. If these were indeed the Reeves Gang, he wanted to assess their intentions before they got too close to the civilian population. The 6 men rode slowly into view, dust rising from their horses' hooves in the late afternoon sun. Declan studied them carefully, noting their well-maintained weapons and the easy way they sat their mounts. These were men accustomed to long hours in the saddle and comfortable with the guns they carried. However, as they drew closer, Declan realized these weren't the Reeves Gang after all. The lead rider wore the distinctive badge of a U.S. Marshal, and the men with him had the disciplined bearing of lawmen, not outlaws. Stepping into view, Declan raised a hand in greeting. "Marshal, we weren't expecting you for several more days." The marshal, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and shrewd eyes, reined his horse to a stop. "Deputy," he acknowledged, noting Declan's badge. "Marshal Everett Shaw. Governor's office said you folks were having trouble with the Reeves Gang." "That's right," Declan confirmed, relaxing slightly but maintaining a cautious readiness. "They burned our schoolhouse last week as a warning. We've had word they might return." Shaw nodded, his expression grim. "We've been tracking them for 3 months. Hit 4 towns and at least 6 isolated homesteads that we know of." He gestured to the men with him. "These are deputy marshals under my command, plus 2 territorial rangers." Declan introduced himself, explaining his temporary status as deputy. By this time, Mayor Phillips had joined them, relief evident in his face when he realized the riders were lawmen, not outlaws. "Marshal Shaw, welcome to Clearwater Springs," Phillips greeted him. "We're grateful for your assistance. The entire town has been on edge since the school burning." "Understandable," Shaw replied. "The Reeves Gang doesn't leave witnesses when they commit their worst atrocities. You were fortunate they only targeted an empty building." "Not entirely empty," Declan corrected, his jaw tightening at the memory. "The schoolteacher was inside, saving books. She barely got out before the roof collapsed." Shaw's eyebrows rose. "She's lucky to be alive. Jedediah Reeves doesn't usually care who gets hurt in his demonstrations." Phillips invited the marshal and his men to rest and refresh themselves at the town's expense, an offer Shaw gratefully accepted. As the lawmen dismounted and led their horses toward the livery, Declan went to inform the townspeople that the alarm had been false. He found Beatrice at the church, reading a story to the younger children to keep them calm while their mothers whispered anxiously among themselves. The relief on her face when she saw him was palpable, and she quickly passed the book to another woman to continue the story while she hurried to meet him. "Not the Reeves Gang," he assured her immediately. U.S. Marshal Shaw and his deputies arrived earlier than expected. The tension visibly drained from her shoulders. Thank God, the children were frightened, especially after what happened to the school. "They're safe now," Declan said. But Marshal Shaw confirmed that the Reeves Gang is still a threat. They've been tracking them for months. Beatrice nodded, her expression somber. "Will they stay in Clearwater Springs?" The marshal and his men, for a few days at least, gathering information and planning their next move. Shaw seems competent. He's been a marshal for nearly 20 years, according to Phillips. As the immediate danger passed, and the town returned to its normal routine, Declan found himself in a strategy meeting with Marshal Shaw, Mayor Phillips, and several other town leaders at the mayor's office. Shaw spread a map of the territory across the desk, marking the locations of known Reeves Gang attacks. "They've been moving in a rough circle," Shaw explained, his weathered finger tracing the pattern on the map. "Hit a town, then retreat to remote areas to lay low before striking again. Based on recent reports, we believe they're currently hiding somewhere in this region." He indicated a rugged, sparsely populated area about 40 miles northwest of Clearwater Springs. "What's your plan, Marshal?" Phillips asked. "My men and I will ride out tomorrow, investigate some likely hideouts. With luck, we'll catch them unawares." Shaw's expression was grim but determined. "This has gone on long enough. Too many innocent people have suffered." Declan studied the map, noting the terrain. "That's difficult country, deep ravines, dense woods in some areas. Easy to hide, easy to set up ambushes." Shaw glanced at him with newfound respect. "You know the region. Passed through it about a month ago," Declan confirmed. "There are old mining claims in those hills, abandoned cabins that would make good hideouts." "Would you be willing to guide us?" Shaw asked directly. "An extra gun with local knowledge would be valuable." Declan hesitated, conscious of his commitment to the school rebuilding and, more personally, his growing connection to Beatrice. Riding out with the marshal would mean leaving Clearwater Springs for at least several days, possibly longer if the pursuit became extended. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally. "I have responsibilities here." Shaw nodded, understanding. "Sleep on it. We ride at first light." After the meeting concluded, Declan walked slowly through the town, his thoughts in turmoil. The logical part of him knew that helping Shaw track down the Reeves Gang was the surest way to protect Clearwater Springs in the long term. Yet the prospect of leaving, even temporarily, felt increasingly difficult. His feet carried him, almost unconsciously, toward the Wilson home where he knew Beatrice would be having supper with the family, as was her custom several nights a week. Sure enough, he found her on the front porch, enjoying the cool evening air after the meal. "Declan," she greeted him, her smile warm in the gathering dusk. "Mrs. Wilson saved a plate for you if you're hungry." "Thank you, but I've eaten," he replied, taking a seat beside her on the porch steps. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Marshal Shaw asked me to guide his posse," Declan said finally. "They're riding out tomorrow to search for the Reeves Gang's hideout." Beatrice's hand stilled in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "Will you go?" "I haven't decided." He turned to look at her profile, elegant and composed in the fading light. "What do you think I should do?" The question surprised her. He could see it in the slight widening of her eyes as she turned to face him. "You're asking my opinion?" "Yes, your judgment matters to me, Beatrice." She considered his words carefully, her expression thoughtful. "The Reeves Gang needs to be stopped. They've hurt too many people, and they'll continue to do so until they're brought to justice." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "But pursuing them is dangerous work, Declan. Marshal Shaw and his men are trained lawmen, and they've been tracking these outlaws for months." "I have experience with this kind of manhunt," Declan reminded her quietly. "I know you do. That's what worries me." Her hand moved as if to reach for his, then hesitated. "You came to Clearwater Springs to leave violence behind, didn't you? To find something different." The perception in her words struck him deeply. "Yes, and have you found it?" Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable. Declan really looked at her, taking in the intelligence in her blue eyes, the quiet strength in her bearing, the compassion that motivated her dedication to her students. "I believe I have," he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "Or at least, I've found the possibility of it. This time, Beatrice did reach for his hand, her fingers cool and slender as they twined with his. Then perhaps that's your answer. The simple touch, the connection it represented, crystallized something in Declan's mind. For too long, he had defined himself by conflict and struggle. Here, in Clearwater Springs with Beatrice, he had glimpsed another path, one built on creation rather than destruction, on nurturing rather than fighting. "I'll tell Shaw I'm staying," he decided. The school rebuilding needs oversight, and the town still needs protection while he and his men are gone. Beatrice's smile in response was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I think that's a wise decision." They sat together as darkness fell completely, hands still linked, the possibility of something precious growing between them, something worth protecting, worth staying for. The next morning, Marshal Shaw accepted Declan's decision with professional understanding. "I respect a man who knows where his responsibilities lie," he said as he and his deputies prepared to ride out. "If you change your mind, we'll be working out of Fort Gibson for the next few weeks. Messages can reach me there." Declan nodded, handing Shaw a rough map he'd drawn of the mining areas he'd mentioned. "This might help. The cabin marked with an X would be my first choice to investigate, good visibility of approaching riders, but well concealed from the main trail." Shaw studied the map, clearly impressed by its detail. "Appreciate this, Armstrong. Keep your town safe while we're gone." As the lawman rode out, Declan found himself surprisingly at peace with his decision to remain in Clearwater Springs. He spent the morning at the schoolhouse reconstruction site, working alongside Miller and the other volunteers to frame the new roof. The work was physically demanding but satisfying, each beam and board bringing the building closer to completion. At noon, Beatrice arrived with several of her older students, carrying baskets of food prepared by the town's women to feed the workers. "The children wanted to see the progress," she explained as they distributed sandwiches and cold lemonade. "It gives them a sense of ownership to watch their school being rebuilt." Declan accepted a sandwich with thanks, noting the way the children moved around the construction site with a mixture of awe and excitement. "It's good for them to see how things are made," he agreed. "Too often, children only see finished products, not the work that goes into creating them." Beatrice looked at him with that perceptive gaze that seemed to see past his casual words to the deeper meaning behind them. "That's a very educational philosophy, Deputy Armstrong." "Perhaps you missed your calling as a teacher," he laughed, the sound surprisingly free. "I think one teacher in town is enough, especially one as dedicated as you." Their conversation was interrupted by Tom Peterson, who approached with an expression of boyish determination. "Deputy Armstrong, could I talk to you privately for a moment?" Curious, Declan excused himself from Beatrice and walked a short distance away with the boy. "What is it, Tom?" Tom straightened his shoulders, clearly gathering courage. "Sir, I've been thinking about what I want to do when I finish school next year. I've always helped my ma with the store, but—" He hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I'd like to learn more about carpentry and building. Mr. Miller says I have a natural talent for it, but he's too busy with his regular work to take on an apprentice. I thought maybe you could teach me some of what you know about construction." The request caught Declan off guard. In all his years of drifting, no one had ever asked him to pass on his knowledge, to mentor them in any way. It was a responsibility he had never considered, yet one that stirred something deep inside him, a desire to build not just structures, but people. "I'm not a master carpenter like Miller," Declan cautioned. "I learned most of what I know working on ranches where you have to be able to fix anything that breaks." "That's perfect," Tom insisted. "I don't need fancy cabinet-making skills. I want to know how to build things that last, things that help people. Put that way, it was a request Declan couldn't refuse. All right, Tom, we'll start with the basics while we're rebuilding the school. If you're serious about learning, I'll teach you what I can. The boy's face lit up with excitement. Thank you, sir. I'll work hard, I promise. As Tom hurried back to his friends, Beatrice approached, having watched the exchange from a distance. Whatever you said certainly made his day, she observed. He asked me to teach him about construction, Declan explained, still somewhat bemused by the request. Seems to have his heart set on becoming a builder. Beatrice smiled warmly. You'll be an excellent mentor for him. Tom needs a male influence in his life since his father passed. The implications of taking on such a role of staying in Clearwater Springs long enough to truly mentor the boy weren't lost on Declan. It represented a commitment far beyond helping rebuild a burned schoolhouse or temporarily serving as a deputy. I'm not sure how much I can teach him, Declan admitted, but I'll do my best while I'm here. Beatrice's expression softened. And how long might that be, Declan? I know you originally planned to just pass through. It was a question he'd been asking himself with increasing frequency. I don't know, he answered honestly. Longer than I expected, certainly. She nodded, accepting his uncertainty without pressing for more definite answers. Well, we're grateful for however long you choose to stay. The sincerity in her voice touched him deeply, reinforcing the growing sense that Clearwater Springs was becoming more than just another stop on his endless journey. It was becoming a place he might call home. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings at the schoolhouse reconstruction, afternoons patrolling the town in his capacity as deputy, evenings often spent in Beatrice's company as they continued to explore their growing connection. True to his word, Declan began teaching Tom the fundamentals of construction, finding unexpected satisfaction in the boy's quick mind and eagerness to learn. Word arrived via telegraph that Marshal Shaw and his deputies had located and raided one of the Reeves Gang's hideouts, capturing 3 of the outlaws. Jedediah Reeves himself and several of his most dangerous men had escaped, however, and were still at large. This news was met with mixed reactions in Clearwater Springs' relief that progress was being made, but concern that the most dangerous elements of the gang remained free. Declan increased his vigilance, particularly around the temporary schoolhouse, where Beatrice continued to teach with unwavering dedication. Nearly 2 weeks after Marshal Shaw's departure, the roof of the schoolhouse was completed, and work began on the interior. The weather had turned colder, with the first frost of autumn crystallizing the grass each morning, adding urgency to the reconstruction efforts. Winter in the Oklahoma Territory could be harsh, and the temporary quarters at the Watterson house, while adequate, were not ideally insulated against severe cold. It was on a crisp Saturday morning, with the sun shining brightly in a cloudless sky, that Declan found himself working alone at the schoolhouse. Most of the other volunteers were attending to their regular jobs or family responsibilities, but Declan had wanted to finish installing the new blackboard that had arrived from Oklahoma City the previous day. He was so absorbed in his task, carefully mounting the heavy slate to ensure it was perfectly level, that he didn't hear the approaching footsteps until they were nearly at the doorway. "It's looking wonderful," Beatrice's voice said behind him. "Almost better than before the fire." Declan turned to see her standing in the doorway, a basket over her arm and an appreciative smile on her face. She was dressed more casually than usual in a simple blue dress with a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loosely pinned rather than in its usual strict arrangement. Miller insisted on several improvements, Declan explained, securing the last bracket for the blackboard. Better lighting, More storage for books, sturdier desks. The children will be thrilled. She stepped further into the room, looking around at the progress with evident satisfaction. I've brought lunch if you're hungry. Mrs. Wilson made chicken sandwiches and I added some apple pie from Mrs. Peterson. The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed Declan. That's kind of you. I am hungry, now that you mention it. They sat together on the new wooden steps at the front of the schoolhouse, the basket between them, enjoying the simple meal in the autumn sunshine. The town was quieter than usual, many families having traveled to a harvest festival in a neighboring settlement. No classes today. Declan asked, though he knew the answer. Saturdays were generally free of formal lessons, though Beatrice often used the time to prepare for the coming week or provide extra help to students who needed it. She shook her head, taking a bite of her sandwich before answering. I gave myself a day off. The first in quite some time, actually. Well deserved, Declan commented. You've been working tirelessly between teaching and helping with the rebuilding. Beatrice's smile was slightly self-deprecating. I'm not very good at idleness. Never have been. My mother always said I was born busy. Tell me about your family, Declan said, genuinely interested in learning more about her background. You've mentioned your mother before, but not your father. A shadow passed over Beatrice's face, brief but noticeable. My father is a banker in St. Louis, very successful, very proper. He had specific ideas about what his daughter should be, and do, none of which included teaching school in the Oklahoma Territory. He disapproved of your coming west. Strenuously, she confirmed with a small, wry smile. He had arranged an appropriate marriage for me, the son of his business partner, a young man with excellent prospects and absolutely no interest in my mind or opinions, only in the business advantages of connecting our families. Declan felt a surge of indignation on her behalf. You refused. I did. Rather dramatically, I'm afraid. I applied for a teaching position through the Western Education Society without telling my parents, and when I received the offer to come to Clearwater Springs, I left a letter explaining my decision and departed the next morning. Brave, Declan observed, admiring her courage. Many women would have accepted the path laid out for them. Perhaps, Beatrice acknowledged. But I couldn't bear the thought of such a confined life, of being valued only as someone's wife, someone's hostess, someone's mother, never for myself, my mind, my abilities. She looked at him directly. Can you understand that? Better than you might think, Declan replied. I left my own path, the one my father expected me to follow to fight in the war. He never forgave me for choosing what he saw as the wrong side. You fought for the Union, Declan nodded. My family were Southern sympathizers, though Missouri was technically Union. When I enlisted, my father told me not to come home again. And did you go home? Once, after the war ended, it didn't go well. The memories were still painful, even after all these years. My father refused to speak to me. My mother was caught in the middle, trying to make peace but unable to change his mind. My younger brother had died in the meantime, pneumonia, not the war, and somehow that was my fault too, for not being there. Beatrice's hand found his, warm and comforting. I'm so sorry, Declan. He shrugged, though the gesture belied the depth of the old pain. It was a long time ago. I've made my peace with it. Have you? Her question was gentle but penetrating, seeing through the facade he had maintained for so long. Declan was silent for a moment, considering her question honestly. No, he admitted finally. Not entirely. There are still nights when I dream of home, of what might have been if things had been different. Do you ever write to them? Your parents? My father died 5 years ago. My mother remarried and moved to California with her new husband. We exchange letters at Christmas, but that's all. He looked at their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt to share these intimate details with her. "What about you? Do you correspond with your family?" "My mother writes regularly," Beatrice said. "She's disappointed in my choices but loves me despite them. My father, he still considers my departure a personal betrayal. He responds to my letters with brief notes instructing me to come to my senses and return home. But you won't." Her expression grew determined. "No. I've built a life here, Declan. A meaningful one. I'm doing work that matters, making a difference in children's lives. I won't give that up to become an ornament in someone else's household." The conviction in her voice stirred something deep within Declan admiration. Certainly, but also a growing certainty that Beatrice Thornton was unlike any woman he had ever known. Her strength, her principles, her unwavering dedication to her calling all combined to create a woman of remarkable character. "I'm glad you came to Clearwater Springs," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "The town is fortunate to have you. The children are fortunate. And you?" she asked, her blue eyes searching his face. "Are you glad our paths crossed, Declan?" Instead of answering with words, Declan leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with increasing certainty as she responded, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. It was a moment of perfect clarity, of recognition that what had been growing between them these past weeks was real and precious. When they finally parted, Beatrice's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with emotion. "I've been hoping you would do that," she admitted softly. "For some time now." Declan smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I've been wanting to, also for some time." "What changed?" "I did," he replied honestly. "Or rather, my understanding of what I want, what matters." He took both her hands in his. "Beatrice, I came to Clearwater Springs with no intention of staying. I was just passing through, running from my past. But now," she prompted when he hesitated. "Now I find myself thinking about the future, about building something here, something lasting." He met her gaze directly. "With you, if you're willing." Beatrice's expression softened, hope and caution mingling in her eyes. "Are you certain, Declan? I know how long you've been drifting, avoiding commitments. I wouldn't want you to make promises based on temporary feelings." "There's nothing temporary about what I feel for you," Declan assured her. "It's grown stronger every day since I found you in that burning schoolhouse, risking your life for your students' books. You showed me what it means to believe in something, to fight for it, to build rather than destroy." Tears glistened in Beatrice's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Then yes, Declan Armstrong, I am very willing to build a future with you." The kiss they shared then was a promise of commitment, of partnership, of a shared journey forward. As they sat together on the steps of the half-rebuilt schoolhouse, Declan felt a sense of homecoming more profound than any he had experienced since leaving Missouri all those years ago. The peaceful moment was shattered by the distant sound of gunfire from the direction of town. Both Declan and Beatrice were instantly alert, years of frontier living having trained them to recognize danger. "Stay here," Declan instructed, already on his feet and checking his revolver. "Barricade yourself in the schoolhouse if necessary. I need to see what's happening." Beatrice nodded, her expression fearful but composed. "Be careful, Declan." With a final reassuring touch to her cheek, Declan hurried toward town, his deputy's instincts fully engaged. As he approached the main street, the situation became horrifyingly clear. Riders were galloping through town, firing indiscriminately at buildings and the few people unfortunate enough to be outside. Among them, Declan recognized the description of Jedediah Reeves, a tall man with a distinctive red bandana and dual revolvers. The Reeves Gang had returned to Clearwater Springs, and this time, they weren't just delivering a warning, they were looking for blood.